Absolute Magician. He set up for...
Hello and welcome to another weekly edition of Nunes and Absolute Livestream. Here as always, Steve Haller, and with me, Christian DeGuzman and Andy Pregler. How are we doing, guys?
Doing pretty good, seeing that we exceeded our onions count last night with the Gonzaga UCLA game.
Yeah, that was a finish.
I would just like to make it known that, one, Eric Devendorf has not yet trademarked the scorer tables jump, so that was a perfectly legal and correct NCAA scorers jump. Just want to throw that out there. The second is I just want to let you guys know I put my name in the transfer portal. I thank you both for this opportunity that you've given me over this last year, but it's time for me to explore other opportunities. All glory to God as I continue this next chapter of my adventures.
Oh, you're moving to the podcast now?
I was going to say, I am now the 15th Syracuse player to enter the transfer portal this week.
All right, if that's the case,
first of all, you need
Christian, we need to open conversations with John and Dan. I think they're both in the portal. So if Andy's heading over, we've got to have a cross conversation here and see if we can get someone in return.
I mean, there's enough people in the portal now to think, right? I mean, but did Andy do like did you do like a Twitter notes thing and say I respect my decision, no more questions, stuff like that? Like if you don't do that, is it really official?
Apparently. To be fair, I did not do those things, so therefore it is not official, and you're all stuck with me for a little bit longer.
And remember, technically, if you're in the portal, you can still come back to your school.
It is true. As long as
so Andy might be back next week. His transfer portal decision is still pending.
So if anyone hasn't picked up on the ridiculousness that we've got going on, there are currently way too many names for Syracuse basketball in the transfer portal on both the men's and women's side, as well as a couple coming in. So it's been a very, very busy week for Syracuse basketball on both sides of the ball. I guess, where do we start? Do we start with exits?
I think we start with the exits first because there's a lot of talk, I've seen it on both sides, about how the transfer portal has created a new dynamic. And some people think it's good, some people think it's bad. I'm not going to weigh on either side of those. What I will say is that new dynamic means that there's over 1,000 student athletes in the sport of basketball alone looking to switch schools this year. And why that is not just a Syracuse problem, but a college-wide quote-unquote problem, somebody pointed it out. I think it was Roger Sherman, but it was one of the Banner Society crew, one of those internet brain guys, who basically said, like, you don't say that after a year where they were not allowed to socialize, where they were not allowed to do anything but practice, go to virtual school, and hang out with their coaches excessively, that over 1,000 student athletes would like to leave their current situation and try something new. So I think that, like, we do have to realize that there's a lot of conversations about gym, and I think a lot of those are valid. There's a lot of conversations about the players that are coming in as well. And ultimately, I think that this is not probably going to be something long-term where we see this level of volatility every year. But I do think that there are schools that are not having this level of volatility. And it might go to show how certain programs run versus how Jim Boeheim and his program chooses to run. And with that, I'm going to toss this up on a silver platter to the golden boy of the Nunes clicks. He gets the golden trophy for the most clicks, most comments this week, and it's Christian, who wrote the article about the Kadary Richmond transfer. And Christian, I'll kind of let you walk through it a little bit more since you have his stats fresher on hand since you wrote the article and everything. But Kadary Richmond, who started the year coming in as the best recruit on the Syracuse roster. He was the only top 100 former recruit on the team. Started off as the backup point guard, continued the season as the backup point guard until he hurt his knee when he finished the season as the backup point guard, even though you, myself, and Steve had all said at various points during the year, he is the best point guard on the roster.
And not just the three of us. Let's take Jordan Cornette, Jay Billis, pretty much everyone else on the ESPN analyst roster. All of them said that Kadary Richmond probably should have been starting. and at least should have been getting more minutes than he was getting. And as inconsequential as some media members may be, not all of them are probably incorrect when the majority of them are saying that a certain player on your team should be getting significantly more minutes than what he is getting. And I explained this to a lot of people who were like normal Syracuse fans and maybe just the college basketball fans or basketball fans in general. The main reason why Jim Boeheim stuck with Joe Girard is last season and during his high school career, Joe Girard showed an offensive explosiveness that when it's right and it's clicking, is Steph Curry, Klay Thompson like on their best days. And that loyalty to that potential offensive explosiveness and Gerard's potential hot shooting is what kept him in the starting lineup, and ultimately what kept Gerard getting minutes and continues to get Gerard minutes is that offensive potential. Now, Kadari doesn't have that same type of offensive potential because his three-point shot just isn't quite there yet. But the consistency that he provides, not just on an offensive, but on a defensive scale for Syracuse and for whatever college program he decides to join, is so much more paramount than the potential burst that Girard might have shown at one point or another. Because that consistency that Kadari showed with his passing and with his defensive length and stealing, he was the perfect player to be in the zone for Jim Boeheim. And the fact that he is no longer going to be with the program is considerably upsetting for, I guess, a lot of you, because, I mean, the comments kind of showed that it was pretty upsetting for a lot of you.
I think, did we determine that was literally the most commented, and I use the word literally, the most commented Nunes post that was a non-game thread in modern, we'll use modern history?
Yes, thank you to at Talkman Heads, aka Mike Held, who basically scrolled through the SB Nation archives and pointed out that I know that we had a 1,000 comment piece back in 2015 or 2016, but it did out-comment both apology tours and a lot of other things that you would think would cause more of an impact.
Right. So there were a lot of people that had a lot to say about Kadari Richmond leaving, and what that evolved to. The commentary on that evolved to transfers in general and a lot of what's going on in the game. And it's understandably, that conversation went in a couple of different ways, but it is understandable to see a couple of different sides to the transfer game at this point, the way that it's currently open, especially this year. It'll kind of, I guess, cinch back down next year under the proposed rule, because it'll only be freshmen and seniors that are like grad transfers that are eligible for the one time. So it will change the dynamic moving forward again, but this year is just going to be utter chaos. Roll the dice and see what happens, which brings us to where we are now. We have the aforementioned Kadari Richmond in the portal. We have Big Bad Bobby Braswell in the portal. We have John Bolajak in the portal. All of those hurt. They're not great losses. We've somewhat started to offset them with the addition of two incoming players who were recruited heavily by Syracuse when they were coming out of high school in Samir Torrance, who is a Syracuse native, who was a guard for Marquette, and Cole Swindon, who is a forward for Villanova, who was extremely heavily recruited by Syracuse coming out of high school. Samsonite. I was way off.
Yes. I mean, you have the biblical Samson hair going on right now if you take it out of the bun, right?
But yeah, I mean, it's been a wild week. As soon as everybody announced they were going, people started announcing they were coming. So, I guess we'll start with Torrance. Where do we think we land with Torrance? What does he offer?
So I do think that it is kind of important to note that with these players that are coming in to date, and that can change because, as you mentioned, Steve, there are two players who have come in. There are a lot more that are leaving. So there will be more. But in the case of both players that have committed to Syracuse, they were previously recruited by Jim Boeheim's staff, specifically the current crop that is there. So that is, if you're trying to read tea leaves, that might be something to look into further. As for Torrance, he's probably not the most interesting one, but he has the most narrative and the most story to bring to the table because he is a local Syracuse player.
Yeah.
And I do think that we'll get into why the numbers are considered to be so bad, but the numbers weren't great at Marquette, especially last year. And because of that, I think, and I hope, and I'm going to use my therapy words to quote Stephen Godfrey here, I feel as if this is the kind of move that you get a player in. He's a local Syracuse kid. He went elsewhere, saw that the grass wasn't as green as he thought it was, is coming back home, will finish out his career with Syracuse. And that is the kind of roster stability that you'd like to start building after a year where your roster was completely decimated due to instability. So that is what I think he ultimately, even if this kid does not get to play significant minutes over his career, I think that is what he can bring to this team on a level that the coaching staff is looking for on a holistic picture. On an actual on-the-court level, he was supposed to be a combo shooting guard who then could not shoot. So, Christian, for a team that is relied heavily on the three-point shot to get offense, both in the tournament and in the regular season, this does not necessarily seem like a great fit, but it does seem like the situation of if he kind of figures it out, and he rekindles his shot, he figures out what was ailing him last year, he could be a good fit. But that's a big hurdle to climb that we haven't seen after 2 years of playing collegiate ball.
And it kind of returns back to the point that I made last week. It's the battle of balance. What does Jim Boeheim want and his team does it want? Can he get the right balance to make it so that the offense and defense are equal, or is it more offensive heavy or more defensive heavy? We'll get to Swider in a bit, but with Torrance and Swider, it's clearly shaped to be more offense, and it's clearly shading towards that direction, which is what Syracuse ran this year. So at least there's some familiarity there. Like you said, Andy, as long as Torrance can find that shot that made him so highly touted as a recruit back in his recruiting cycle. Now at 6'3", the height isn't necessarily there for a guard. He does have a 6'8" wingspan, so maybe that helps him a little bit because you do like guys with a long wingspan, i.e. Kadari, i.e. Frank, i.e. Tyus on the at the top of the zone. So if he's coming off the bench, if I'm not sure, we really don't know what his defense is going to look like because, I mean, at this point it's kind of a crapshoot what your defense looks like when you're transitioning into the zone. But you would think with his length, that could be some sort of help to at least like intercept some of the passes or discourage some passes and moves into the high post, which is what starts to unravel the zone. So that might be the one plus that you get to see. But like you said, Andy, if the shooting doesn't improve, it's not necessarily a ideal pickup for Syracuse with the way that they want to run their team in the recent past and in the near future.
Yeah, and I don't love saying this again about a kid that we haven't seen a lot of, but like when you compare who's leaving from the portal, John Bolajak was not a big contributor, but there were two players who were the reason that Syracuse made it to the Sweet 16, Rob Braswell and Kadari Richmond. And in the case of Braswell, you had a stretch player who was able to knock down threes, take the ball inside. He was really looking like his game's come around. You saw those positive moments immediately before he entered the portal. That's not the case with Torrance, and that's not necessarily the case with the other player that Syracuse brought in, and that might be why there's a little bit of hesitation and there's still some trepidation going on. But again, these are players that Syracuse initially wanted. The other player, Cole Swider, I'm going to keep mispronouncing that. I'm so sorry, Cole, is another former Syracuse target who ended up choosing Villanova and has opted to transfer. Now, he is a very different type of player. He's, again, known for his outside shooting, but he's got a very different physical profile and actually shot the ball well.
Yeah, I mean, shot over his Villanova career, he shot 35.7% from three, which is still again a pretty decent clip. And and what you like to see is that his accuracy has gone up in each of his years at Villanova. So it was at around 20%. Or about 25% during his freshman year. Then during his sophomore year, it rose to about 35%. And now during his junior year, his last season, he shot just over 40% from three. So you can see the improvement is there. The points tally isn't quite there for Slider, but that's because he was mainly a bench player. He did play in all of Villanova's games, coming off the bench, started two of them, but who knows what we're going to see again, because from what we've said, it seems like it's another very offensive minded recruit, and we've already seen with Alan Griffin what happens when the offensive minded recruit doesn't have the necessary defensive backing to necessarily um, discourage the offense, or back up the offense when it starts to fail.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how both of these guys fit in. I don't. Neither of them are like slam dunk. You see them and you're like, yes, that is a Syracuse like 100% Jim Boeheim prize recruit type guy. Like it's not the next. And I say Hakeem Warwick even though he was actually a second fiddle to Julius Hodge, but like Warwick, and I don't know, Christian, if you remember that story. That was a little. I think that was before your.
No, I don't. No.
So, not to digress, but we're going to digress. And 30-second timeout also for the fact that congratulations to Stanford on winning the women's title. While we were pulling this off, they apparently went down. Arizona gave it their absolute all, and Ari McDonald ended up almost making a game winner as time expired. But
I'm watching the shot now, and she basically throws up a desperation three with three UConn defenders in her face and hits the back rim.
That's
like
a Freudian slip there, by the way. Stanford defenders.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yes, she already knocked off UConn. White jerseys throw me off. But yes, it was remarkably close to going in and being the craziest buzzer beater in the history of basketball.
So we could have gone back to back on stupid shots.
Yes, we could have gone back to back on stupid shots, which I honestly, all credit to both of these programs and all programs who've made it this far for getting to this point. It's fantastic, and they are putting on a show, and I respect the heck out of them. Let's talk about Hakeem Warwick, who also put on a show in the NCAA finals.
So Hakeem Warwick was, and you know him as, lanky, Stretch Armstrong that made the block. But when he was recruited, Julius Hodge was committed to Syracuse, recruited heavy by Syracuse, and ended up snubbing Syracuse for NC State. SU picked up Warwick late in the recruiting process because he was still out there and available. And you look at him and you'd think he's the prototypical grab him right off the bat. But he ended up developing into the player he was and was the physical specimen for Syracuse. They basically, neither of these guys fit into that, lanky athletic four mold or, lanky athletic three that can shoot and penetrate and do it all, or the Kadari Richmond size guy at the top of the zone, like you were talking about earlier. So where they fit in, we'll see. They're definitely going to be able to give us some minutes, but beyond that, it's just a big question mark as to where they're going to fit into everything. Like I know if Boeheim's taking them on, they're going to have a spot on this roster and a function, but it's not like a guarantee we know what exactly to expect out of them.
Right, and we don't even know what the rotation is going to look like because, as we mentioned, there's four confirmed names transferring out of the men's program as of now. Maybe there's going to be a fifth, potentially a sixth if Quincy goes pro. So we're looking at 2 players in for up to 6 slots that need filling, and that it's not like It's not as if there's anybody in the transfer portal who is an absolute slam dunk. This player will change a program.
No.
Otherwise, they'd be staying at their current program. But to your point, Steve, there might be somebody in there or there might be someone who's going to enter that we haven't heard of yet. That might be that prototypical physical fit, and then develops, the necessary skills to become a little bit more than that and be this really good, fit for Syracuse in the long run. But it's just so weird, because I think if we were to take a step back and say, what does the roster look like next year in terms of the starting five, because ultimately that's all that matters. Jim Boeheim maybe will play one other guy, maybe two.
Right.
We're looking at Gerard, Buddy, Benny Williams, who's coming in as the highly touted 5-star recruit and now is almost assuredly starting at the 3.
Yeah.
Jesse Edwards at center, and you really just kind of need to fill in this power forward, this traditional 4 slot. And not to speculate too hard, but there does seem to be a Boeheim-sized hole at the 4, and there happens to be a Boeheim who's playing at a Ivy League school who might want to come and play with his brother and his dad. Not that anything's been confirmed, but
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point that's confirmed without confirming. Like, if it doesn't happen, I'll be more surprised than if it does happen. But
Yes.
The other thing, and I know we've tossed it around, is if James Arthur Boeheim Jr. decides to show up on James Arthur Boeheim's team, he's a 5th-year senior that is going to get a shot to play with his brother and under his father. And is he willing to accept a bench role for that? Because if some of those guys stay, we're going to see a lot less time than if he came in and wanted to start right off the bat. So that transfer may be relatively inevitable, I'm curious as to what that would actually mean for the roster and the players on the field themselves.
Because we got to remember, guys, that yes, Quincy's testing the draft, but again, he hasn't signed an agent, so he could do a Tyus battle and come back to the program if he wants to. We don't know what Dolezaj's going to do, and if Dolezaj decides that he wants to take his extra year of eligibility and return to Cuse again, I mean, he's immediately a 4, or unless Boeheim decides he wants to start Dolezaj at the 5 again.
Please no.
But we'll see. But if Dolezaj comes back, he's going to get a starting spot. End of story. So, but let's remember, everyone, let's pump the brakes. Like, the only 3 confirmed returning guys are Gerard, Boeheim, and Edwards. No one else is confirmed to return yet, so it's a huge roster limbo right now. And as Andy said, we're expecting more guys, potentially as soon as this week, to enter their names into the transfer portal and to continue the roster upheaval that we're seeing right now. So it's as everyone said, it's going to be looking like a lot different. Again, it's because of the one-time transfer portal rule, the one-time free transfer where you don't have to redshirt because you are transferring schools. That's why you're seeing a lot of this roster upheaval, and it's almost like everyone was at the end of their 1-year contracts, because I mean, in college you're always at the end of a 1-year contract, and you're going into free agency. So this is basically the free agency period that I'm not sure NCAA fans wanted. I'm kind of here for it, even though it's a weird situation with Syracuse with so many key pieces leaving. But I mean, when you're following pro sports, this is totally normal when you have huge free agent classes and some decimate rosters. But for the college fan, when you're used to so much stability because of of how hard it is to transfer and how hard it is to go through the draft and stuff like that, it's pretty jarring probably for most of you guys.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Christian, and this is Steve, something we've kind of talked about on the football side with coaching, and I don't think we talked about enough on the basketball side. It's not like these players are just kind of waiting in the wind and they're like, oh, today I don't really know what I'm feeling. I'll wait until tomorrow. There is a coach. We don't necessarily know who it is the same way we do on a football team. There is a coach getting these answers and giving these kids hard deadlines so that way they can make choices. So even if we don't know it publicly, the coaching staff has a pretty good handle on who's coming back and who's not. Yeah. And that's well, we might be necessarily like saying, oh my gosh, how are they going to manage this? They probably already have a good idea of what level of flexibility they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting run. Um, I really this one-time switch is throwing everything for a loop. And speaking of roster upheaval, um, on
I mean, you thought 2 and 3 were bad.
right, if you thought 2 and 3 leaving were bad, the SU women's team currently has two, likely three returning. Uh, Currently, the only active players that are on the team and not either in the transfer portal or leaving for the WNBA, a la Tiana Magakahia, are Priscilla Williams, Camila Cardoso, Ava Irvin, and Tisha Hyman. That's it. That's their entire roster. Nope,
They
sorry.
could not.
They did have a transfer come in Shalaxis Aaron, who is a USC transfer that is inbound to the Orange. But from last year's squad, you have 4 women who have not decided to transfer. So I guess bravo to the 4 of them. It'll be awesome to see them again. However, what?
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, we know the ball is going to Camila Cardoso.
Yeah. When there's no other option, when you don't even have a full starting 5, you should probably fill it or feed it down to the potential All-American.
Yeah, in general, I thought Sarah Stanley, who wrote the Syracuse women's basketball, is going to be all right. I thought that she made some really good points in her article, which was trying to not necessarily put lipstick on a pig, but kind of outline how the numbers are shocking, yes, but unlike the men's team, this was probably planned from Q and his coaching staff's point of view, in that you had 4 players of those people who are transferring or leaving the program: Kiara Lewis, Digna, Amana Fina Giddy, and Mava. They're graduating in May, and there was probably already an expectation that they were going to leave. So that's 4 players right there. Another 4 players were the ones who were suspended, and there was the expectation that once that kind of set in, they would probably be walking away from the program as well. So immediately, you've already got like 8 spots that going into the ACC tournament, Q was already mentally preparing for. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that like everything is okay. The big, not issue, but the big surprise that has become a little bit of an issue is Emily Ensletter, who decided to enter the transfer portal and has opted to go to Louisville, which means that Syracuse will be seeing her on the court this year. Assuming that she's getting a starting role. That's why she's transferring to Louisville. And yeah, they were already like one of those pesky middle tier teams that Syracuse is often competing with in that pesky middle tier of the ACC. That one hurts.
The problem is, that would be true almost any other like time frame. That's not true for Louisville anymore. Yeah. Louisville, the past 2-3 years, is a top 2 program in the ACC.
Yep. Yeah, and
so
this year,
that's the bigger reason why it hurts.
Oh yeah, watching what they did to SU this year, and then thinking about them doing that with Emily Ensler on their roster, it's gonna be an uphill battle. The Orange do have a solid. I think it's a top 30 recruiting class coming in. Might be top 35ish. Yes. But another solid recruiting class coming in under Q. So hopefully the roster fleshes out a little and they can kind of recover from this mass exodus. With the portal open, there are options for players to come in. So his system may not be as difficult to adapt to, at least defensively, as Boeheim. He runs the zone, but he doesn't exclusively run the zone. So that's also might be a little easier for the women.
And also on the women's side, if you shoot 3-pointers, you're probably getting a call from Q.
Also true.
1,000%. And I think overall we'll see a Q do the same thing that Boeheim's doing right now. Hit that transfer portal, look for a specific type of player, and grab a bunch of them. Maybe none of them are high impact, but again, like you said off the top, Christian, you've got a 6'8" Brazilian stud in the middle of that rotation. Just get the ball to Camilla. And everything will be okay.
Brazilians who come to Syracuse usually end up to be pretty good basketball players.
It is not an inaccurate statement.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways I'm going to take that. I'm not going to go any different direction with them. Just make sure the off the court stuff is good too.
Yeah,
that's why I said they're good basketball players. I didn't mention other things.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So that seems Flux. I believe Flux seems to be the current state of Syracuse basketball.
Yeah, and it's not the worst place to be. It's just not necessarily where you want it to be after the women kind of bowed out of the tournament early because they got UConn, and the men put on a Cinderella run that made everybody feel warm and fuzzy.
And don't forget, like, Syracuse has had found transfer success before. I mean, remember, after the 2016 season, when Syracuse made that miraculous Final Four run, they brought in 2 solid transfers, and John Gillen and Andrew White. I mean, yes, Syracuse didn't make the tournament the next year, but like those 2 were not the reason why. Well, maybe Gillen defensively, but like they weren't the main reason why Syracuse didn't make the tournament in 2017. And remember, the major one before that was Michael Benechet, who didn't have the greatest stats at Duke, and then turned out all right in his final 2 years at QC.
Yeah, he was okay.
Just a stretch turned point guard who was the first time that Jim Boeheim might have looked at the NBA and said, "Ooh, I want to do that."
Imagine if Morik turned into that guy and finally, like at the top of the zone, not as the wing, but as the guy at the top of the zone, the true point guard that we all want him to be.
Absolutely.
Steve, we need to take a week off
I wouldn't be here
to write all the articles.
Yeah.
He'd be doing laps around his house, just like.
Actually, I don't have a good transition for that one. But I am going to talk about our sponsor today, Home Field Apparel. As you can guess, Home Field Apparel is once again our sponsor for these wonderful live casts. They provide remarkably comfortable vintage collegiate apparel, like the one that the t-shirts that Steve is wearing. My home field that I'm wearing, I would pan down to wear it, but however, I have learned that in the pandemic, panning down on a MacBook camera is probably a good way to get kicked off the internet. But I am wearing the home field joggers. They are remarkably comfortable. They're great for running. They're great for being lazy and drinking beer.
Yeah, don't pan that far down. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Joggers, you got to take my word for it. They're comfy. You got to find some. But you can go onto the Home Field Apparel website. You can take a look at their Syracuse collection, which added a new T-shirt for basketball season. It's that wonderful old block-ass, not the current block-ass.
Yep.
The old block-ass that Penn State tried to co-opt, but a lot of other schools also had. And it's a basketball shirt. You can get 10% off your entire order with the promo code NUNES10. Take a look on the screen. You can see the word Nunes. Just add a 10 after that, and you get 10% off your entire order. Fantastic. Make sure you also harass Home Field Apparel on Twitter. The most popular tweet that I have posted in over 3 years was the picture of Tom Crean's face tagging Home Field. This is just how you have to treat them, and this is just how the world works right now.
I mean, you could say that Home Field is the point forward of apparel companies.
Oh, they are.
Oh,
they really
there's
are.
your transition that we missed.
God damn it, Steve! You got to start getting in on me when you have good transitions. Come on.
It took me a while.
Okay. Wonderful production quality here.
Took that whole vamping of you reading with the ad read for me to come up with. So
Our production transitions were the friends we made along the way.
Oh, thank you, Sean Keeley. I will say the production value of this show is fantastic. It's just that the actual scripting of it is non-existent, just the way that Connor and Home Field like it. So, do we want to eat our sad vegetables, or do we want to go positive and then eat the sad vegetables?
Let's eat the sad vegetables, get it out of the way.
Lacrosse did not have a good weekend. Christian, this was the weekend.
We didn't play any lacrosse this weekend. That's fine.
I mean, but actually, did we play lacrosse this weekend, or did we not play lacrosse this weekend?
I will tell you what happened. The Syracuse men played lacrosse for a quarter, and the Syracuse women played lacrosse for about 8 minutes.
and then they both got curb stomped. So I'm going to start with the women, not because I want to dismiss them, but because we had kind of Christian, you had mentally prepared us for this. You had said that UConn, or that not UConn, Jesus, that
Essentially.
yeah, the UConn of women's lacrosse is UNC.
There we go. That's that new house kicking in.
Yeah, there it is. You had warned us that the UNC game was going to be difficult at best, and that more than likely UNC was going to come in and punch Syracuse in the mouth, and it probably wasn't going to be pretty, especially since the game was on the road. That's what happened. Were there any positives to take out of it besides Syracuse is on another level, UNC is on another level?
Literally the first 10 minutes of the game. That was the main positives. Because the first 10 minutes, when Syracuse was 4-1 up on UNC after the 20-minute mark was shown on the clock, the Syracuse, again, a 4-1. And they showed, like, there was a pretty good way to beat UNC. I mean, as long as they took their shots well, like, it was good because they showed a really good idea and strategy, which was actually fire some shots from about 6 meters out, and force Taylor Moreno, UNC's goalie, to make some stops. But what happened afterwards is that UNC decided to not give Syracuse any space and start kind of just checking if they were going to be like not lazy. And then that's when the turnover started to happen, because what happened after that 4-1 scoreline is that UNC started to turn up the defensive pressure, and then the turnovers started happening because UNC started causing a ton of turnovers, not just after winning, not just after Syracuse won draws. Once Syracuse was in their offensive set, they started stick checking them and poking balls out of the women's lacrosse stick. Which, if you've seen a women's lacrosse stick, it's actually kind of easy to do because the pockets are not deep. So they were able to stick check just poke the ball out of the sticks, and then it doesn't take a lot for that UNC offense to start rolling. And unfortunately, we go back to this trend all the time with Syracuse, is that you can't ball watch. And Syracuse started losing track of UNC's cutters into the middle of the field. And when you have elite passers like the Tar Heels do, they can make very, very tough passes into the middle of the field and create opportunities that Asa Goldstock just can't stop. And that's essentially what happened. And
it stinks to say that it really comes down to being that simple. But UNC was really good. This is not the last time Syracuse will probably see UNC this year if they're going to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. This loss doesn't push Syracuse out of the NCAA tournament picture. But it does kind of establish the power rankings, is that UNC is number 1, Syracuse is clearly number 2. And it sucks, but that's kind of where they are.
Yeah, and I mean, to put it in perspective, Syracuse didn't score for almost 29 minutes after the 4-1 score line. So
jeez.
That's the kind of run that UNC went on, and you can't give them an ounce of momentum because they started figuring out Syracuse. It was turning up the defensive pressure and then making the cuts into the middle so that Goldstock just couldn't stop anything. Again, like you said, it's hard to make it that simple, but it was. And unfortunately, if Syracuse tried to do that to UNC, let's say, it wouldn't have the same effect, because some of the passes that UNC made into the middle of the field were ridiculous because they're crazy hard through passes that a basketball player would have would be tough to make, and you're doing it with a lacrosse stick, which is infinitely harder to pass than a basketball.
Yeah. So with the women's side kind of not necessarily out of the way, but we know the situation with them. They're gonna have to play UNC again. They're gonna have to adjust and see what happens. The men, listen. My understanding of it was that the face-off circle, once again, was not Syracuse's friend. And this has been something that you have said multiple times. Aside from the face-offs, what else went wrong in this game? Because it seemed like that was not the only thing that happened.
The only thing that I can say went particularly wrong was that Drake Porter was under 50%. on the saves. He only made 11 saves and gave up 18 goals. But that has to be, and that's not a great game from Porter. He knows that, that's not a great game from him. But you can't do a lot when you're outshot the way that Syracuse was. I mean, Notre Dame had 47 shots, and Syracuse only had 34. Shots on goal, Notre Dame had 29 shots on goal to Syracuse's 21. So, like, Porter was seeing infinitely more shots than Liam Entenmann was on the opposite side. And as good of a goalie as Porter was, there's going to be a point where it just doesn't stop. And the way that Syracuse just was continuously losing faceoffs meant that Syracuse was continuously on defense. So that meant Porter doesn't get a break. And you started to see the defense get a little tired as well. And just unfortunately, like, when you're not winning faceoffs and you're not giving the defense a break, that's when you're going to start to see some of those defensive flaws that Syracuse are probably more prone to, because the defense isn't the strength of this team. But like you said, Andy, it comes down to one thing. It's the faceoffs. Like, Syracuse, we're at a point in the Syracuse history again, and this was Syracuse after their Cornell win in 2009, where they're back in the same place in their program that was around 2010 to 2015, before Ben Williams came into the program, where the only thing that's holding back Syracuse is the faceoffs. Because if Syracuse could just figure out the faceoffs, you can see the pieces start to fall into place as to where Syracuse can compete with the Dukes, the UNCs, and the Marylands of the world. Because Syracuse has a team on paper that should be with those top three teams in college lacrosse right now. But if they don't solve their problems at the X, they're not going to be in that top tier.
And, like, that is super frustrating to hear, because this is not the first time that I've been a Syracuse lacrosse fan and heard this. This is not the last time that we're going to hear this. But it's just boiling down to a really simple issue where now Syracuse has, like, a lot more L's than we thought that they might have this year. And they've got a lot of good wins, and the schedule is really difficult. We knew that was going to be the case. We knew that this is going to be a season where they don't finish unscathed. And they're not going to miss the tournament unless they completely bottom out. Just because they do have some marquee wins. They are showing that, they belong in this conversation of, like, really good teams. But the question does have to kind of be asked is, like, is it that Syracuse is just not on the same level as these elite programs? Are they a step below it, or are they on the same level, but they just have one very clear exploitable weakness?
I think there's a combination of both things, because there are considerable talent differences in some cases. Because Syracuse doesn't have that quote unquote Tewaaraton guy that they would have had in the past, like maybe a Kevin Rice, maybe, or something like that to that effect, or Jojo Marasco, or like basically they're missing that Alpha 22 that maybe some people expected Chase Scanlon to be, but he really hasn't developed into that. Because I mean, let's look at the top the three programs that I mentioned that are the top tier programs. It's Duke, UNC, and Maryland. Duke has Michael Sowers. UNC has Chris Gray. Maryland has Jared Bernhardt. Those are the top three guys in the Tewaaraton Award. One of those three guys is going to win it. No one else is really in the running for the Tewaaraton Award. So Syracuse really is kind of missing that guy. But their units in general, except for maybe the close defenders, can hang with most of the guys, pretty much any unit in the entire league. Because the attack when it's rolling, because we've seen Stephen Rafis be really underrated. Chase Scanlon is starting to come along, and Owen Hiltz is still an incredible freshman who is only going to get better from here on out. The first midfield line is one of the best in the country. I mean, we all know what we're getting with the first midfield line. Brett Kennedy and Peter Dirth are excellent defenders and your midfield defenders. One of the flaws that you get, the two major flaws, let's also mention Drake Porter, because he's one of the best goalies and will be a top 2 goalie in the PLL draft. One of the major flaws outside the face-off X is the depth at defense, because at close defense, it's not near the level that some of the other ACC programs have. Mitch Wyckoff has been a great revelation, but Grant Murphy and Nick DiPietro aren't necessarily at the same levels as the other 2 and 3 guys on other close defenses in the league. And then the depth behind Peter Durst at short stick defensive midfield, contrary to what Paul Cartera has said, I just don't think it's there right now for Syracuse to really compete when you've got some other really talented midfields in the ACC. But when you look at this Cuse team in general, it's still a good Cuse team. Like, there's still some star players. It's just that they need to get their chances. And you can't get those chances if you don't get the ball. And if you don't get the ball, your defense is going to tire out, which is not just what we saw here for lacrosse. We also saw it in football. I mean,
yeah.
it's and we see it in basketball as well. Like, if Syracuse, like, let's take football. If the Syracuse offense doesn't do its job, that means the defense has to stay out on the field longer. They get tired. That's what led to the scores that you saw this football season. In basketball, the zone allows an offensive rebound. Then you have to play defense for another 30 seconds. That's what gets them tired and lowers their effectiveness. If Fopp and Varello don't win faceoffs, the defense is going to get really tired when you're going up against really talented attackers in college lacrosse right now.
Yep. So we just got an update. Steve will not be joining us for the rest of the show. He is dealing with a back problem because.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, things that things homeowners have to deal with. But anyways, I just wanted to let everybody know that we did not kick. Steve did not enter the transfer portal. He is still very much here and intends to play out his contract with the NunesMagician live stream, which stinks because Christian,
I wasn't aware of this. What?
Sorry, bud. We got you. It's really great that you brought up football because I want to kind of move us off the doom and gloom of lacrosse and start
in his room. Okay. I had to. It was right there. He was
no,
right
it's
there.
fair. I totally understand, and I want to start talking about football. And so there are two big things that happened with football this week. The first is NFL draft stock, which we'll kind of wrap up on because that's fun, great. But I want to talk about 2022 recruiting. So John had a piece, not kind of, but it was kind of positive. And it was basically that the Syracuse recruiting trail for 2022 is off to its fastest start under the Dino Babers regime. And this is significant for a couple different reasons. The first is that we've seen it with programs that are not in the top tier. You need to get kids signed early before they blow up and then get targeted by these schools that are in the top tier. So you want to make sure you sign your guys early in order to protect them. But it also kind of goes to show that the program has solid traction, that it has momentum, and having kids already signed allows you to help better recruit because those kids who are signed will start recruiting on behalf of you, whether it be just social media, whether it be just talking up Syracuse, sharing highlights when good things happen. It's in general good to lock down kids as fast as you can. So the Syracuse recruits who are already added for the class of 22 are Cornell Perry, LaQuint Allen, Malachi Davis, and Belazaire Bissett. For those who might not be as familiar with those names, they're basically a bunch of 3-star talents that are traditional Syracuse targets. Florida kids that kind of fell through the cracks. They project to be more athletic than they are big and bulky. And in the case of the defensive backs, they look to have a lot of raw upside and maybe not necessarily have the developed skills. Christian, you've been following some of the recruits a little bit more than I have, just because you tend to be on the news and then do the write-up article and dig through the huddle footages. I don't do that until National Signing Day. In general, is there anything on the recruiting front that, not necessarily that people should know about, but that you feel is a positive sign for Syracuse moving forward, that especially coming off of the season that we've had?
Well, I'm not sure how much this would relate to moving forward, but for those who don't know, Syracuse is finally started spring football practice. They started on Tuesday, March 30th. And Dino Babers held a press conference shortly after that press conference. And he was asked about getting those recruits in. And he said, basically, the Zoom era of recruiting, because remember, these guys can't go on official visits because of all the COVID rules that the NCAA has put in. The Zoom era of recruiting basically allowed Syracuse to pick up these 4 recruits pretty quickly, much more quickly, as John pointed out, than in some past years. So that might not necessarily translate to the future, because from what it sounds like, when you're a coach and you're in this Zoom era of recruiting, you have to kind of make different judgments in a way on how you judge players, because first of all, you're watching tape. You're watching highlight tape. You're not watching them on the field in person. And you're interacting with them in very different ways. Like, these guys aren't coming up to campus also to go on official visits. You're really selling them on the program, the opportunity that you can give them. Dino did say, like, one of the big advantages also is that you get to sit with them, with their parents, in the Zoom call. They really get to know them more on a personal level that way, which could be, helpful in the future. But there's not a lot of transferable, like, tactics, you could say, that would allow Syracuse to maybe keep up this type of momentum in coming years, because we're still in such a unique era with COVID and everything that, like Dino told me last year, like, Syracuse in the 2021 class has 2 offensive linemen coming from Hawaii, and if COVID didn't happen, there was probably no chance that those guys would ever be considered in the recruiting class. So it's a lot of adaptation right now, but it remains to be seen if maybe the quick get of guys can actually spur some momentum to get quick recruits and quick commits in the near future.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this Zoom era of recruiting. I think that you and I both read the Athletic piece that came out like last year that was about all the different anonymous coach feedback, and a lot of coaches in the ACC were kind of talking about, like, it's great, they don't get to see our trash facilities, they don't get to see how much better the basketball program is treated than the football program. I'm like, this isn't unique to Syracuse. There's a few other ACC schools that are in the same boat that we are. So again, any kind of leveling of the playing field, and we're seeing it more with Syracuse too, where these kids are getting offers, SEC offers, when they commit to Syracuse, because we're getting in early. And John kind of floated the theory out in our Slack that there are a couple of MAC programs, Western Michigan being the one with the most recent Syracuse ties, that are known for evaluating talent really well. So as soon as they offer a 3-star, the rest of the Power 5 kind of jumps on to say, oh, if this this program's offering them, they must be good. So let's review the tape and let's actually take a look at this kid a little bit more. So that seems to be something that Syracuse is jumping on. We know that Dino and his staff have a ton of MAC connections and know this kind of talent evaluation process. So they're probably right along in line with that. On the other end of the football playing life spectrum, once you are done with recruiting, you eventually hope to go pro. And Syracuse has a bunch of players in this upcoming NFL draft. We're still in mock draft season. The draft itself is not going to be taking place until the end of the month. So there's still a lot of time for this stuff to change and shift. However, we are seeing that the Syracuse defensive back triumvirate of Andre Sisco, Trill Williams, and Ife Melifonwu are getting their due. And there's another player who's also entering the draft, Nolan Cooney, as a special teams specialist kicker. We've seen it with all times NFL kickers. You're a punter, you're a place kicker, depends on what the NFL team wants you to do. They're all entering the draft this year. And we had an article this week that talked about how Mel Kiper updated his prospect rankings on both overall and positional basis. And this is kind of important if you're following along at home, because overall position ratings are often what NFL teams that draft the best player available go off of. They have their own internal versions of them, but Kiper's usually pretty tuned in. He kind of knows what the deal is. And 2 players, Sisco and Nolan Cooney, wound up in the position rankings. Sisco was 4th among safeties, and Cooney, who was originally a walk-on, he's the 5th ranked pure punter, which is great. Now, there's Trill and Iffy were not listed, and you can kind of talk a little bit more about this, Christian. Trill is going to be a difficult one to show up on a position list because he's a positionless player in today's NFL. He just kind of he kind of does some things, and you hire him as a defensive specialist.
Yeah, you kind of. It's almost like if True was, and I hate to say this about Syracuse, but if True was playing at like a more nationally recognized program, he could almost be like an Isaiah Simmons type of guy, because that was Isaiah Simmons coming out of Clemson, who like didn't really have a position, but you knew wherever you placed him on the field, he was going to do well, and that type of versatility is what's going to make Trill such a enticing prospect for teams to pick. So, but because of that lack of position, and maybe the lack of stats also, like you're probably not going to see him picked into the third round. So, but he's really intriguing to see it, like, because he has the raw physical skill sets. I mean, a lot of people love the raw talent. It's just not quite there in terms of like the pure stats on page, and maybe there's some questions, other questions that we don't know that might have him lower on the draft boards. So, but I think he'll get drafted. It'll probably be somewhere around the 6th round. But it should be interesting because we're expecting Cisco and Melifonwu to be drafted within the first 3 rounds. One of them, if by chance team rates them more highly than others, could go in the first round, because we've seen some mock drafts have one of those guys go in the first round. So it will be exciting for Syracuse to see where these guys go in the draft. Cooney probably won't get drafted because because punters maximum, I mean like a complete maximum of 3 punters get drafted, and usually it's only 1 if you're lucky. So, but he could easily like sign on because he showed enough leg to get signed on to like at least a training camp.
Yeah. So overall, I think we'll continue to follow their draft status. There's going to be more. There's going to be more workouts. There's going to be more combines. All these players are going to be noticed, and hopefully this is going to be a record-setting draft day for the Syracuse football program in at least modern history, which would be great. And so with that, we have reached the end of our live cast. Nobody has actually transferred away. We have all decided to return to the live cast for now. If that changes, there will be a 700 comment article on the website about this, because naturally that's just what transfers do these days. And yeah, this has been another great night. So for Christian DeGuzman, for Steve Haller, thank you so much for joining us. Like, subscribe, smash that like button is something I've heard the millennials say.
Dumb young folk.
Exactly. Just we're going to be on YouTube for a while. Well, if you're watching this on the NunesMagician site, great. Come on, pop over on YouTube. And with that, go Orange, and we'll see you next week at the same time, same place.